I am Jennifer Mitchell. I'm Hope's Executive Director. While I wish we were in person, I am happy to be here with all of you this morning, albeit virtually, to welcome you to our discussion on the future of work. I hope you all have your cup of coffee or tea and are ready to sit back and learn. Our panelists have a robust and timely discussion for us planned for us this morning. We'll be focusing on the burgeoning green economy, the significant impacts that COVID has had on the retail and real estate sectors. They'll be sharing insights on how artificial intelligence will be impacting hiring moving into the future. And then we'll be talking about the implications of all of this on the workforce development field. We are so appreciative of our guest speakers, our sponsors, our community partners, our supporters, our staff, our students and graduates, and all of you who are joining this important discussion. I will see you again towards the end of the event. In the meantime, I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and to add your questions so we're prepared in the Q&A. It's my pleasure now to turn it over to Lauren Samuel, Hope's board chair.
Good morning. I'm Lauren Samuel, chair of the Hope Program's Board of Directors. Welcome to our first ever panel discussion, Ready for Tomorrow, the Future of Work. COVID-19 has enormous impact on New York City, with unemployment twice the national rate and the deepest budget shortfalls in decades. However, this economic impact is not evenly distributed. Low-income New Yorkers, largely in communities of color, face job loss at twice the rate of many of the rest of us. Those who remain employed are often in low-wage jobs deemed essential, which heightens the risk of COVID. These unprecedented times call for us to be responsive to today and ready for tomorrow. What the opportunities of tomorrow will look like is what we're here to discuss. Here's what we know. Many jobs, which are widely considered entry-level, are contracting: administrative support, customer service, assembly. Artificial intelligence and automation in the workplace, already at play pre-COVID, are accelerating, leading to increased need for higher-level skills. Across the board at every level and every sector of the economy, workers will need to demonstrate essential skills, resilience, the ability to learn, and problem solving. We're honored to hear from a range of experts today, from real estate, what will Midtown and the financial district look like as we continue to work remotely, to the green economy and the role of AI in hiring, to how meaningfully not only rebuild New York City, but build an inclusive recovery. Thank you all for being here and for joining us for this critical discussion.
Hello there, everybody. My name is Sarah Khari. I'm a producer at WNYC, or New York Public Radio's Radio Lab, proud founding member of the Hope Associate Board. I would love to introduce our panelists in a second, but before that, I'm just going to remind everyone that today's event is being recorded, and you will have access to the recording at a later time. But we're just going to jump straight into our discussion, which will be followed by Q&A at the end, where we will take questions from all of you. So please do comment in our chat, share what organization you're with and where you're watching from today. Glad to see so many of you commenting already. And please do ask questions. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Our first panelist is Tommy Brown. Welcome, Tommy. Our next panelist is Doreen Harris, the acting president and CEO of NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, who is here to talk about the future of green jobs and sustainability. Our next panelist is Nancy Liu, who is the managing director at Kurt Salmon, which is part of Accenture Strategy. Nancy will be speaking on the future of the retail industry. Hi, Nancy. Our next panelist is Jose Ortiz Jr., the CEO at NYCETC, the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, who will lend his workforce development to this conversation.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
Nice to be with you.
And very last but not least, Frida Polly, the co-founder and CEO of Pymetrics, who's here today to share her insight and knowledge on the future of tech and AI.
Pleasure to be here, everybody.
Hi. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So I think we can just jump straight into it with our first question for all panelists, which is, how has your industry been impacted this year due to the COVID pandemic? So Tommy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. While the real estate markets were generally healthy pre-COVID, the current state of the market is that overall transaction volumes have fallen significantly. Poorly capitalized deals are faltering, and what I would say is the real estate asset class is breaking down into what we call winners and not so winning categories, which we'll talk a little bit later. For example, on the retail side. Part of this is what I would say is the intersection of a few things that are happening in the real estate space, and number one of them is the sort of the density and interaction. Whether or not people need to be together or not is influencing the real estate markets. Secondly, it's sort of the average lease term. Hotels are clearly impacted; people aren't traveling. Whereas on the other side of the equation, office has longer term leases, and generally hasn't been hit as hard today. And then thirdly, I'd say, which is what we'll spend a good bit of this morning talking about, is just the acceleration of trends. Some that were there pre-COVID and some that are now, have arisen from COVID, such as work from home. The long-term impacts, I'd say, are still unfolding, but it's clear that we've got winners and losers. And the winners are on the data center side, for example, and losers are on the shopping center side, since everybody's at home buying things online.
Great. Doreen, let's go over to you. How has the COVID pandemic affected things in the green jobs and sustainability sector?
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you today and to speak with you about clean energy. It is true that prior to COVID-19, the clean energy sector was growing, which is a great sign for us as we look forward. However, it is true, like many other industries, since March, we have lost nearly 17,000 clean energy here in the state. We're pleased to see those jobs rebounding over the past few months, but we are down about 10% of our clean energy that we had in the year at the end of the prior year. So it's good to see that is happening. We see it specifically in the energy efficiency and solar markets, which are growing back most expeditiously. And as you had previously described, the fact that we do have disproportionate impacts on different sectors of our economy, both with respect to climate impacts, COVID impacts, and economic impacts, that collectively we look forward to using these tools to put together.
Great. Thank you, Doreen. How about now we go over to Nancy. Nancy, how has the COVID pandemic affected things in retail?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I think all of us as consumers have really seen a pretty big impact on the retail sector overall. I would say since COVID, there's been a fundamental shift in the competitive landscape. I think just since March, 27 major U.S. retailers have filed for bankruptcy. So overall, there's just been a significant reduction of retail stores, a lot of closures, and definitely some, as Tommy said, some losers in this game. So the weakened retailers are definitely trying to survive, preserving liquidity, optimizing existing assets, and one of those tactics is to reduce labor costs. While there are definitely some winners, and a lot of the winners are the ones that really embrace digital as a channel and been able to really pivot how they operate in terms of contactless, self-checkout, curbside pickup, all of those different ways that consumers now want to shop. And then also, I think one of the big focuses that has emerged is a focus on responsible retail. I think responsibility, a lot of consumers are looking for retailers to be responsible to the consumer, but also their employees as well as the planet. A third of consumers would consider brands' treatment of employees to be more important to them in determining where they buy since the pandemic. And then lastly, I feel like there's been an immense growth and resilience through innovation, data, and partnership. Retailers are really accelerating the use of predictive intelligence, automation, and technology to better make decisions and manage the risk and unknowns that this pandemic has, um, really brought onto the overall economy.
Great, thank you, Nancy. Let's go over to Jose.
Hey, Sarah, thanks again for having me here with you this morning. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, 2020 saw record unemployment due to COVID, and the resulting economic fallout created a job loss at the height of around 1.25 million New Yorkers. Many of those spread out throughout the private sector, about close to a million of those in the private sector, 330,000 of those jobs are also independent contractors, and all seeking pandemic unemployment assistance around that time. And it should also be highlighted that the vast majority of those folks were people of color and women. So while the city's unemployment rate stands at around 14% right now, the national average is around 7%, and statewide we're at 9.7%. So there's a massive uphill climb here for New York City, and workforce training organizations like those a part of our membership have always been here to serve folks that are traditionally underserved, that require training, retraining, upskilling, etc. So at the time of the start of the pandemic, after taking some time to reassess, like most companies and organizations did, most of our organizations action and went to digital services, training online where they could. And brought together stakeholders across New York City to ensure that we don't simply go back to normal, because normal is low wage jobs and low economic security for many folks. So we sprung into action and set a recovery in motion to address the city's most vulnerable New Yorkers, ensuring that we can create a more stable future for them.
Right. And lastly, let's go over to Frida. Can you speak about how the pandemic has affected hiring and tech?
Yeah, sure. I think the pandemic has affected hiring in the short term in reducing hiring across a number of different industries. Although I think that coming into next year, that will probably pick back up, and we've already seen it grow. It's very sector specific. I think more broadly, however, the pandemic has really shifted hiring to more digital formats. So whether it's video interviewing or using digital platforms like Pemetrics, it's a whole host of moving towards virtual formats. There was actually an article about this in the New York Times over the weekend, and I think that's both great and potentially, something to be careful about, because it's wonderful because I think it actually improves access to opportunity. If you think about college hiring, traditionally, an on-campus hiring process really preferences schools that are immediately close to employers and potentially not those that are further away. And as you can imagine, that might not result in sort of the most equitable processes. So from that perspective, it's great. From the perspective of then we need to make sure that our technology platforms are equitable, that's the concern, that we have. And of course, Pemetrics has, engaged in all sorts of policies to ensure public trust that our algorithms are indeed equitable. However, that's not the norm yet, although we hope it is. And there's actually an interesting bill going through New York City that would sort of push folks in that direction. But that's the big concern, I think, is making sure that these tech platforms are built equitably.
I see. So switching tracks a little bit, one thing that I'm interested to know is about broadband access. In April, the mayor reported that 1.5 million New Yorkers lack broadband access at home. And there's an effort now to expand that to reduce the divide by about 40% over the next 18 months, which is definitely a step in the right direction, but really not enough. So, and we also know that New Yorkers not only lack access to broadband, but too many New Yorkers also lack the skills to leverage resources and compete in the future economy. And so, Tommy, I was hoping to ask you, how do we bring these communities into the future economy?
Yeah, Sarah, it's a great question. You know, what I'd like to say is that the broadband, for me, I would think of as more of an execution issue. It's critical. And the question is how do we roll it out and how do people get access to it? But for me, the real question, though, is really what does the future look like? And I think going back to the office, if we just focus on Manhattan for a second, is not really going to be the same. It's going to be modified in some way, new protocols, new practices. You know, what I would say is that 9/11 ushered in sort of a 20-year era of security. And as we come out of COVID, we're really focused on, or facing sort of a 20-year focus on healthy building environments and changing work patterns. And so really, what does it look like when everybody goes back to the office? If we just focus on that for a second, I think what we've learned is that working from home technology really can free us from the physical environment. And secondly, I would say that you know, work routines don't necessarily need to be bounded by this 9 to 5 construct. And so if we take that and we say, what does it really look like when we go back to the office? I think that from my perspective, we're going to transition into some type of hybrid environment, sort of a virtual analog combination where people are coming back into the office, but maybe not 100% of the time. I mean, we're certainly focused on this, as investors in the office space. What's the demand for office going forward? And I think, our current view on it is that, we'll eventually go back to this 100% normal office environment, but utilization is going to be different. Not everybody's going to be there perhaps every day. We'll still have 100% utilization of the space, but it's going to require us to maybe rethink the physical office. How do we integrate participation? How do we make sure that people from working home can participate during the day? And what that means is if we think about this, in the next 2 to 3 years, at the end of the day, the skill set that's going to be required for people to participate is going to be really a combination of sort of those baseline skills that we talked about in the opening. The ability to learn, the resilience, the teamwork, but it's also going to be, it's going to require people to participate like this virtually and be able to work in a new environment so that they can contribute both, again, in the analog sense in the office and then virtually like this. So I think, to really answer the question is how do we leverage the resources and compete in the future? It's making sure that everyone has these type of skills to effectively compete both virtually and in real life.
Right. So, Jose, I'm sort of wondering from your perspective, like, given, the need for people to be able to participate virtually, of course, I'm curious, how is the workforce responding to that growing need?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm, just taking a step back for a second. Digital poverty has been an issue for many of our most marginalized New Yorkers for a long time. There are tons of neighborhoods and communities that remain, virtually disconnected, and it became increasingly relevant as a result of COVID because many folks, even many of us on the line, were forced to remain home, but also experience other technology issues, breakage in the broadband and low resolution and too many folks on the internet at once simply. So this, I think it became increasingly relevant for us. And in the early days of COVID, we surveyed our membership in partnership with the Human Services Council here in New York City. We found that 13% or 70,000 of the 600,000 New Yorkers served by our 180 members remained disconnected, meaning they did not have both broadband access as well as a computer or a smartphone. Many more did not have one or the other. But 70,000 of the 600,000 New Yorkers that we surveyed. So this is a greater issue than I think we had imagined or that we considered relevant at that time. And if you can't access the internet, you can't learn from home, you can't work from home, you can't access employment systems and benefits from home. Additionally, you can't play around and discover new technologies in such a way that would allow for folks to become familiar with the types of tech skills that employers require. And so, as an organization back in April, in response to the growing crisis, we organized a working group of over 80 leaders from private and human sector partners and created the New York Workforce Recovery Strategy Group. Our single goal was to develop a recovery plan centered around displaced workers in marginalized communities and small businesses. And so the resulting effort was a comprehensive report that we call Recovery for All, which the Hope participated in as well. And it detailed this critical need of broadband access. We need to develop and expand and fund the citywide 21st century career development system focused on training, upskilling, employment and education, and supports for a post-COVID economy. We need to bridge the digital divide that we just talked about by ensuring that workers and program participants have access to these technologies and the internet through increased access and availability to broadband, technical assistance, and those devices that folks require as well. And digital skills training needs to be expanded, especially for workers who have been displaced or adversely impacted by automation, which has obviously sped up as a result of the pandemic. So this is an important conversation. It's an important need for our communities. And I'm just pleased to see that the city is moving in the direction of supporting this, particularly with folks who reside in NYCHA housing. But this is a much more expansive issue that requires a much more expansive effort throughout New York City's communities.
Right. So, somewhat relatedly, Frida, your work at Primetrics is quite fascinating and literally focused on the future of work through automated hiring, which leverages artificial intelligence and aims to address the diversity challenges, which have always plagued the workforce, and as we've talked about, are at the forefront now. And so I'd sort of like to ask you to just share more about your approach.
Yeah, sure. So I think technology companies in general are often sort of lumped into one sort of monolith bucket. And what Amazon's gender bias resume parser all technology companies must do, and that's just not the case, right? I think technology really behaves in the way that it was designed to behave, just like anything else in life, right? Like you can make a car to be super safe, or you can make a car to street race in LA, right? Those two things are different, even though it's still a car. So it's the same thing with technology. So the point I'm trying to make is that technology can be designed from the ground up to be unbiased and to be diversity friendly. The goal of Primetrics is to make sure that people are matched accurately to jobs in a way that is both most predictive and most fair. And I think historically we've sort of believed that, if we were going to, advance diversity goals, and I think this is not the right way to think about things at all, but people are like, we have to lower standards. That's kind of this thing that we hear sometimes. That is absolutely not the case. In fact, there's research to show that oftentimes we lower standards for people that we see in those roles more often than we lower standards for those that we don't typically see in those roles. So the point is, Primetrics, through a variety of mechanisms, both by using largely unbiased data and then auditing all of our algorithms to ensure that they don't have gender and ethnic bias, actually can match people to either external roles in hiring or internal roles for mobility or reskilling or whatever, in a way that is both predictive of future success, which is obviously critical, but also gender and ethnically fair. And that's essentially it. And I think we're a small company. We're 120 people. If we can do it, we think that anyone can do it. It's not a question of, it being too cost prohibitive or too difficult to scale. It's really just about designing your technology in a particular way.
And so I guess
and the results we've seen speak for themselves. I mean, people not only, stay longer, perform better, but we've improved, gender and ethnic diversity in basically all of the companies we've worked with, including, financial services companies like Blackstone to CPG companies to consulting firms like Accenture. I mean, so, it's a wide range of companies that can use unbiased tech in their workforce selection processes. And, across the board, they see not only improvements in quality of hire, but also in diversity.
Right. Interesting. So I'm curious to put the question to the rest of the panel. Perhaps if we start with Nancy, how are you seeing automation play out in your sector today, whether through hiring or just work in general, and what do you anticipate in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, as Frida mentioned, I think this idea of using technology, predictive analytics, to really like match demand with supply within the workforce is definitely a trend we've been seeing even pre-COVID, and I think it's even more accelerated since COVID. I think overall, just embrace of technology and automation, specifically for like I think workforce. We talk about a liquid workforce, and it is definitely AI enabled. So think about I think about it as almost like a Uber for employees. We've seen that deployed for like shift workers on the front line who are in the stores who may be looking to match their their schedules to balance their personal needs with like the company needs. So using technology to say, okay, well, I have a shift in the morning, but I don't have childcare this morning, but I may have a coworker who may be looking for extra shift in the morning. How do I find that person, right? So we see like the use of technology for that. And then since the pandemic, I think we've also seen like an employer to employer matching in exchange using technology. I think multiple companies have launched kind of this we'll call people plus work platforms. I think the retail sector experienced a lot of furlough of employees at the beginning of COVID, while other industries, other retailers were actually looking to hire because they were experiencing a surge of demand. And then also thinking outside the retail sector, like matching potentially hotel chains with retailers. So for example, this was a story we saw through like an employer through employer match. I think it was in Northern Texas. A large global hotel chain company was furloughing a lot of housekeeping resources, while like a big box retailer was looking for increase of store cleaning resources. And through this platform, they were very quickly able to find and redeploy and really, help optimize hiring and turnover costs.
I see. So just to keep moving through all the various questions I have for you all, Doreen, there's a lot of talk about building back better. We've heard that from Biden. We've heard that in a lot of different places in this post-COVID economy, which means, I think, in large part, a focus on green jobs. And I'm curious, how is New York State broadly and NYSERDA specifically focusing on a more sustainable future, and how do you see that work cutting across sectors?
Yes, we have the benefit in New York of what I would view as an amazing law that was signed into law in 2019, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which has a goal not only of clean energy goals in the nation, but commensurate objectives to ensure that the benefits of our investment in achieving those goals come directly to disadvantaged communities, an amount, with a goal of 40% of those benefits. And so when we think about this, it presents a huge opportunity for us. When you set a goal like we have in New York under Cuomo's leadership, it's the stage for huge amounts of investments in renewable, in energy efficiency, in transportation, in buildings, and the like. And all of these investments would not be possible if we did not have force here in New York to support those new industries. And really, with this focus on disadvantaged communities as one of our stars as part of the CLCPA. So we at NYSERDA have put this goal to work with our workforce development programs. Over $100 million have been put to work creation of this workforce, and what better time really to find these new career people who may have displaced from their current jobs and the like.
Right.
So we do prioritize those investments for the most vulnerable populations. And in fact, notably, Hope Foundation in that regard, to prepare residents disadvantaged communities for jobs with a goal to train 140 individuals as a great example of that commitment.
I'm curious too how other sectors are thinking about sustainability. Nancy, do you have a sense of how that has either shifted or intensified during COVID?
Yeah, well, I think many people have seen like retail as an industry overall has over the years really focused on what we call like ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. I think a lot of retailers have gotten a lot of bad press for factories in that are not labor friendly in terms of child labor or just even the conditions. I think COVID has definitely refocused that energy because I think since March, what we've seen is companies that have had a better focus and better grasp and invested more in ESG efforts over the years have shown to be more resilient and have come out, I guess, better than others. Also, the consumers are really demanding retailers to be more environmental and socially conscious in their practices. I think we've seen some survey results come back where consumers have said like 81% are going to buy more environmentally friendly products over the next 5 years. And 66% of them are willing to pay a premium for some of these products. So I think retailers are seeing this as an opportunity both for the planet, but also for their their shareholders.
I see. And another thing that I'm curious about in terms of retail is, and you sort of talked about how so far, the industry has been impacted by the pandemic and how people are trying to respond. But one more, quick thing that I'm wondering is, where do you see things going forward? What's the trajectory and what skills do people need to compete in the changing face of the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Tommy, Jose, Frida, and Dorian have all like talked about this, but it's like this shift in digital has been huge. I Since COVID, I think there were some jokes at the beginning of COVID about like who or what is responsible for your company's digital transformation, and the answer is COVID, because what we've seen, unfortunately, is there were definitely retailers who were, making these investments and making very pointed steps to transform, but COVID has really accelerated that. And those that were there early really were able to protect their performance throughout this pandemic. And I think digital will just become a sustained trend, even post-COVID. So what we're seeing is we're anticipating that 20% of the US retail sales in 2020 will be digital, and that's up from 11% in 2019. And it's not just traditional e-commerce, but also social commerce. And social, it's like anything through mobile or Instagram or Facebook, like these new channels are really where consumers are shopping. And overall, I think all of us have experienced this since COVID. We're just spending more time online. I think surveys have shown that in general, consumers are spending 10 to 30% more time online. And that's been only exacerbated through COVID now that we're working from home, shelter in place. Nielsen ran a study last year that said on average, in 2020, consumers will be interacting with some kind of digital media 12 hours a day. So if you sleep 68 hours, that means 75% of your waking hours is interacting in some sort of social, digital content.
Right.
And that's just immense. So I think we're seeing that the pandemic has really accelerated the shift to e-commerce by almost 5 years. So it's like pressing the fast forward button on digital adoption within retail.
So,
And with, sorry.
mhm. Oh no, thank you,
Uh,
Nancy. I'm so curious also to ask Tommy about this, because as you're saying, Nancy, so much of with the shift to digital remote work, it's led to an emptying of office buildings, closing storefronts, as Nancy you said, and I'm sure Tommy, that home sales in Manhattan have dropped by over 50% this past spring. Much of New York's workforce is connected to that infrastructure, construction and sales, etc. And so I'm curious, what do you think will the future of real estate look like in cities like New York, and how can workers prepare to thrive in jobs that'll emerge as a result?
Sarah, I would go back to what Nancy said in terms of online e-commerce penetration, and how that number has grown in the last several years. I think if you extrapolate that out and you look and say, what's it going to be in 2030, then the number is actually quite staggering. And so the impact of that is multiple across different industries. If we start with real estate, for example, the impact of that on the industrial space in terms of how we're going to deliver goods to people is staggering. And when you add to that, you have to sort of rethink your supply chain and get goods to the consumer faster. There's just a flow-through effect in one sector of real estate. What I would say is that as you think about real estate, a couple of things to keep in mind. One, I would make the comment of urban versus suburban. But more importantly, I would make the comment, if you look at, for example, the public REIT sector, there's now 17 different asset classes. In the private real estate markets, we would segment that out. And there are many more subsectors of real estate asset classes and how we invest. And each one of those is being impacted differently. You brought up residential in Manhattan. Certainly as you look at the five boroughs, I think Manhattan's had the largest number of residents leave over the last 9 months. But as you look at just real estate within Manhattan and you go through hotels, that market's completely frozen. In short, it's almost collapsed, just given the lack of business travel and the lack of any customers. You look at retail in Manhattan and you go up Madison from 60th to 80th. There's 3 or 4 vacant shops each block. And then you go look at what we would call essential retail, necessity retail. The Duane Reads and the grocery stores were open during the pandemic. And so as we think about it from a real estate perspective, we sort of have to break out each segment and what the impact is in terms of, again, online presence and how that's changing, shopping patterns and just the economy. But more importantly, how it's shifting the overall work going forward. And again, we break that down asset class by asset class to understand what those long-term demand drivers are. I would say that as we think about the world going forward, it's understanding and trying to understand, again, what's essential retail versus discretionary retail, and is that a sector where you want to be? What's the office sector going to look like?
Interesting. So kind of switching tracks here a little, and sort of reminding ourselves that because we're here on behalf of the health program, I want to put the question to all of you and ask, what is something in your respective field, in how you're thinking about the future, that you are hopeful for? And maybe we start with Jose.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm a hopeful person. Those of you who know me, so I'm particularly hopeful about the economic growth and the recovery effort here in New York City. But I'm especially hopeful for a more inclusive economic recovery built by and for a diverse population. I think that has been something that has become pressingly important during this period of time. I think there are a number of things that resulted in that coming to fruition. However, in order to achieve this, we need, less rhetoric and more policies created by and for those who currently are left out of normal power structures. And so the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, in partnership with our friends at the Association for Neighborhood Housing and the Regional Plan Association, recently launched an initiative called the New York City Inclusive Growth Initiative. It's a 2-year initiative supported by the Ford Foundation and JP Morgan Chase. And the goal is to develop an agenda here in New York City that adds good jobs, retains and expands affordable housing, and drives the economic recovery forward while reducing the structural inequities that have existed and increasing access and opportunity. And so we're trying to take a much more holistic approach to this recovery effort by anchoring this on workforce, economic development, and housing, but informing us by the other things that have been that regularly are important to people in their lives and that were also impacted during this recovery effort, like racial and social justice issues concerning folks around infrastructure in their community, the access to good transit and safe transit, considering the pandemic. And so it's a complex discussion, but we're currently in the process of doing that, seeking members to form a steering committee that is representative of that diversity here in New York City. Diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, immigration, income status, and thought. And we're proactively work towards creating an inclusive process for non-traditional educations as well. So I'm very hopeful. I think the process that we're working on will help to unfold a direction or recommendations for a direction for the city to be much more inclusive. So, yeah.
Great. And so on that note, briefly, Frida, what are you hopeful for?
Similar to Jose, actually, I think that we're involved in, I think I mentioned some policy efforts at the city level to really ensure that tech is built and not built, but that it is acting in a fair way. And I think that there is increasing actual commitment to this from a wide variety of areas. And so that's what makes me the most hopeful, is that, technology companies, be they small like Pymetrics or much larger, are raising their hand to say, yes, hold us to higher standards. We want to be more transparent about the outcome, because we really don't want to just engage in performative allyship. We actually want to make a real difference with this problem. And quite frankly, it's better for everyone. So we should all be aligned around doing so. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Right. Doreen, let's go over to you. What are you hopeful for?
Sure. Yes, I am also hopeful together under our nation's climate law that we will hit the mark that Jose was just describing so aptly, that look at a future that is full of clean energy, but one that is built in a way that's inclusive. It is the case that we want to make sure that no one is left behind. And to do so, we've had to adapt. Our training programs that we traditionally run have changed somewhat. We need not only to find new workers, but to upskill existing workers. So I am hopeful that our policy will continue to drive investment in these, and that'll transform our economy for the better.
Great. And on that note, Nancy, what are your thoughts on that? What are you looking forward to and hopeful for?
Yeah, I think I'm hopeful for new opportunities. I think many people on this panel have talked about, there's obviously we're in a period of disruption, but I also find that if history tells us, sometimes these periods of disruption can create a fertile ground for innovation and opportunity. And I think especially around talent and employment, Frida mentioned earlier, now a lot of employers are emphasizing boundaryless talent sourcing. So regardless of proximity to corporate headquarters or within retail to specific stores, that means there's just now more opportunity for people to seek employment in areas that once were out of reach. So that's, I think, exciting.
Great. And Tommy, last but not least, what are you hoping for?
That's all right. I would say in today's world of this increased online presence and information overload, what we've all realized is that there's the ability to sort of disconnect from community and disconnect from people. And at the end of the day, what I find amazing about the HOPE program and what Jose and Doreen are doing is that we're bringing together people. And so I'm hopeful for community and bringing people back together to focus on, all the issues at hand.
Right. Yeah, I'm hopeful for that too, for sure. And thank you all for sort of, leaving us on that note of positivity. That's actually like a great segue to introducing our next thing, which is hearing from a Hope graduate, Donnell, who would like to share a few words about his story, his thoughts on the future, and how Hope prepared him to be ready for tomorrow.
My name is Donnell McNeil. I'm a recent graduate of the Hope program. I didn't have an easy childhood. I bounced around from shelters to group homes, even juvenile prisons. So I got into a lot of trouble. I got into a lot of incidents that I shouldn't have been in. I got arrested a week into my 21st birthday. I did 20 years in prison. I just came home just recently, and I was extremely worried about how I was going to get a job when I get released. Hope was intense. You had to get up. You had to be early. Like, you can't even be on time. On time is late. They expect a lot from you. You don't just have your classes where you work, but you also have homework. And they expect it. They expect it to get done. The instructor that I had, she put 110% effort. She wasn't at all going to let you miss or mess up. I can't say enough good things about her. I wish y'all got to meet her. I wish all of y'all got to meet her. And in the mock interviews, you met with different people that actually work for successful companies. They let me know what I did right, what I did wrong during the interview as far as their perspective. And I brought all that to the interview. And, I killed it. Went on the interview and got the job. My job is great. I work at a job called Shield Our Heroes. And what they do is they make face shields for first responders, medical personnel, hospitals and all that. The thing about making face shields is you're actually doing something. You're doing something that matters. I started there. They started everybody as part-time. They already offered me full-time. So my future right now is extremely bright. Getting a job is actually the stability to do all the other things I wanted to do. One of the sayings that Hope always says is, when you hope for life. And I know it may sound cliched and corny, but I actually feel a part of the Hope community. They still send me other jobs, educational opportunities, wellness opportunities, and it's encouraging to know that if I do have a setback, I can contact Hope. I do want to say thank you, everybody. Appreciate your interest in the Hope program. It was huge for me. It matters. It matters when you feel like somebody is invested in your future.
I think I can, on behalf of everybody in the audience, when I say thank you, Donnell, for sharing your story. If you are moved by Donnell's words of perseverance, we invite you to make a donation today in support of Hope's effort to provide sustainable futures for our students. Also, Giving Tuesday having today being Giving Tuesday is a great day to give. So, you can, I think there's a donate link somewhere down here. Please feel free to do that. And so before we move on to our Q&A, I just want to invite the audience to type out any questions that you all have into the comment section. We'll be taking live questions from all of you in just a few minutes. And while we are getting those questions in, I just want to pass it over to Hope's Executive Director once more. So Jen, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. What an informative and fascinating panel discussion. I'm excited for the Q&A because if you've been following the chat like I have, there's lots of excitement and interesting thoughts. I've learned new terms this morning. I also plead guilty to be one of the people who has started shopping on Instagram because we spend so much more time online. So I just want to take a moment to thank our really brilliant panelists. Your insights were spot on. Our very skilled moderator, our esteemed planning committee, our generous sponsors, and in particular, LGT Capital Partners USA, who was our lead sponsor this morning and our partner in planning this panel. I also want to thank all of you who have joined us here. We're so excited to have you, and we welcome you into the Hope family. I have been executive director of Hope for nearly a decade. And this work is hard, even in the best of times. But this past year has been a real doozy. Lauren describes it at the top of the hour. The community served by Hope and many of our peer organizations around the city have faced unprecedented challenges. I feel really grateful that we are a trusted community partner and that we've been able to be at the forefront of addressing many of these challenges alongside our students and our graduates across the city. We've been able to not only continue with our core mission, but we've responded to the emerging and immediate needs of our students and graduates in the moment. Joey said the term digital poverty. We saw that, March 16th, we went remote and we transferred all our classes to remote. And we realized that people didn't have technology to do that. So we started distributing computers and Wi-Fi hotspots to our students and grads to keep them moving forward. I think we've distributed nearly 400 to date. We also realized there were food needs, rent needs, Pampers, hot plates, school supplies. And so we started putting direct cash assistance into the pockets of our students and graduates. And we put over $200,000 to date into people's pockets just to cover basic needs. We also have transitional employment programs, and our students and grads have earned through work in the community over $200,000. And they've been doing jobs that are focused on building the sustainability of our city. They've done census outreach, they've done voter registration, they've done community greening. And so while we're responding to today, we're also getting people prepared for tomorrow and planning for this future economy that we have some more insights in today, though it's still pretty uncertain. And maybe most importantly, and I saw somebody said it in the chat, like, how do we support people's emotional needs? And then Donnell, thank you so much for sharing your story. Donnell mentioned it too. We ramped up our signature Hope for Life services. For over 35 years, Hope has been saying, we'll support you to get that first job and build that career. And we really do believe when you're Hope for life. And so you heard from Donnell. Also, we get frequent notes from graduates and students all the time. And on Thanksgiving, we heard from one of our graduates, Crystal, and I want to quote part of what she said, which was, I appreciate all the Hope program has done for us during this hardship. I came to Hope to improve my chances of employment, but I got so much more. I got a support system I can rely on, a family that wants the best for me, and people who really care. And that's everything right now, right? The future is uncertain, but if we are all there, and I think Thomas said it best, it's community, it's building community, and we need community now more than ever. So in my role at Hope, I have the privilege of working with inspiring students and grads every day. And I also have the privilege of working with generous New Yorkers, including all of you who registered for this event and care about the future of New York City, not only for your own careers, but for all New Yorkers. And so a couple of people have mentioned it already. Today is Giving Tuesday, a global day of giving. And there's so many ways to give. And so I'm going to ask you or give you some choices on how to get more involved with Hope. If you have folks in your network who need your support or our support, send them to us. We have virtual information sessions twice a week. Join us or send people who need us and our services to those information sessions. If you are an employer and you are hiring skilled workers, give us a call. Our community is ready and eager to get back to work. And finally, if you are in a position to give, join our sponsors like LGT and Karen Seymour and David Petro Citron and Prosec Partners and make a contribution to Hope today. It's actually been fun sitting here because it is Giving Tuesday. I've been watching the chat with all these people being really interested and excited about Hope. And then I've been watching our Network for Good page. And so we are excited to be here on Giving Tuesday with all of you and support us. And you'll be providing a New Yorker with a chance to learn and grow and a brighter future. So thank you all for being with us today. And I'm going to lead it back to Sarah to facilitate our Q&A session and wrap up the morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hey everybody, thank you Jen for that. We'll go straight into Q&A. And our first question that I'll ask, referencing something that Lauren said at the very beginning when we started, when she mentioned the continued importance of soft skills and essential skills like resilience, like problem solving, and the ability to learn and adapt. And so I'm curious to put the question to our panelists, to what extent is that true in your sector? Has that changed during the pandemic, intensified perhaps? And do you anticipate changes as work continues to automate? So let me put that question to Frida.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, so that's the entire premise of Pemetrics, is that people's soft skills are far more important oftentimes than their hard skills. And I think if you look back to the gentleman who just spoke to us, I think I'm sure he had no hard skills necessarily that were relevant to what he does now, but his soft skill profile is what got him there. And again, we see this across, everything from, private equity analysts to package handlers. I mean, there's no job type that can't benefit from understanding someone beyond what's on their resume. I always say, like, everyone is more than just a resume, and soft skills allow people to really shine, and they're such important markers of what actually makes people successful. So I'm just giving a plug for however you want to measure soft skills, metrics or something else. It's a hugely important endeavor, and also they are far more equally distributed than hard skills. Hard skills are so dependent on your socioeconomic status, your upbringing, and yada yada. And so I think if we really want to move towards a more equitable society, soft skills is the way to go. So a little plug for soft skills.
Tommy, I'm curious how you approach that question as well.
It's hard. Real estate is such a broad term. And so when anybody says real estate, there's so many parts of the economy that touch the real estate asset class. And so I would really have to break that down, from, as Frida was saying, you have like sort of the analyst level on the investment side, all the way down to the people that are in property management, doing things on a day-to-day basis physically in the building. And so it's sort of a hard question to answer. But, what I would say is, as we go forward, to Frida's point, the soft skills, I think, are going to be what bring people back to the office. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all social creatures, and so we crave that social interaction. So being able to, as we reemerge back into the economy and to a more sense of normalcy, having that soft skill, I think, is going to be critical in bringing everybody back together.
And if I could just add to that, Thomas, so JLL and CoStar are both using the Pemetrics soft skill system, right? And they, again, are able to create profiles that are unique to all of the different roles. Because to your point, real estate could mean a million different things, right? So I think it's just important to understand that when we think about soft skills, there isn't like one soft skill that is important for all jobs. I think that's what sometimes we're taught to think in sort of reading articles on this. It's actually much more specific than that. Like, memory may be really important for this job, but not at all for this. Emotional IQ might be super important for a whole host of jobs, but, maybe not as much if you're, an independent contributor on a technical team. So it's really, I think we're at a place now in life with our technology development where soft skills can be ascertained on a much more specific basis, and they can provide just windows of opportunity into roles for folks that might never have thought about that or really been considered previously. So again, little plug, and I'll stop talking now.
No, that's great. So the next question I have is that the workforce sector is always eager and ready to build deeper partnerships with employers to align training and connect job seekers with jobs. So, I'm curious to put the question to some of you. In your sector, what are you currently doing to partner with the workforce community? And what opportunities might there be in the future? How about Nancy? What's your take on that question?
So I think in the retail sector, I feel like one of the biggest focuses for a lot of the companies are around upskilling and reskilling with like digital transformation, just like a more influx of technology and automation and everything, I think employers are thinking about how to redeploy their existing resources, how to give them additional training and the skills, and it's going to become a more continuous loop of training and upskilling and reskilling. And I think that's where I see opportunity in the future for partnership. How to do that in a more, how to do that with partners, right? Because I think a lot of retailers, companies may not be able to take that on themselves. So I think that's an opportunity in the future for partnership around training and reskilling.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a perfect transition to a question that we have from somebody in the audience. His name is Mark D, and he's at Brooklyn Public Library. His question is, during the recession, many employers cut expenses by shifting to a temporary workforce that left people with uncertain schedules and incomes. What is one thing needed now to avoid a repeat of that? What legislation, what policies, government spending, and worker upskilling? Doreen, do you have a take on this question?
Our sector in energy is to provide certainty, long-term certainty with respect to any policy that we advance. And in doing so, we give the knowledge and the awareness to clean energy employers, hire people term and permanent basis. They know that the demand will be there, that our policies will go on for time, and that they can feel assured of those investments that are needed to bring people on, not in a temporary context.
Right. I'm curious, Jen, on the hope perspective on this question. How is Hope thinking about moving forward?
Each and every day, Hope is working with folks in different ways and thinking about, what someone's background is, what they want to do, what their aptitudes are, what we call them essential skills, what I think everybody keeps referring to as soft skills. It's like the skills you need in order to be successful in anything. And one of the things, and I noticed it in the chat earlier, it used to be like basic math, basic literacy, but really basic digital knowledge is also very, very integral right now. And so kind of putting all those pieces together and then also giving people the support and the confidence and the connections they need is the way to think about, getting that first job and partnering with strong employer partners and then building a career trajectory.
Right, I see. And I think those are all the questions that we're going to take. And so that concludes our first ever panel discussion, which we have called Ready for Tomorrow, the Future of Work. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting discussion. I feel like we've had so many different perspectives. And to everybody in the audience, thank you all for being with us today. Stay tuned for a recording of the conversation. To send to everybody who missed it, that'll be posted on our YouTube page. Thank you all again for joining us to discuss the future of work at this really critical time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.